Well, hi, I'm Eddie.
And I'm Eugene.
And we are
Middle-Aged Barbarians.
That's who we are, yes. Very middle-aged, very barbarians.
Yeah. Today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about different types of role-playing games, different genres, different, what would you say, modules or campaigns, and
well, when we talk about
flavors.
Exactly, flavors is the right word, because, as we said, we talk about high fantasy is the most popular genre that there is. This is this Tolkien-esque adventure, questing sort of thing.
Elves and humans and dwarves and some epic quest. If not, the world will be destroyed and everything will come to a catastrophic end. But sometimes that's boring.
Well, I mean, if it's the only thing you play constantly, yeah, that kind of gets stale. And sometimes perhaps you're not as interested in something like that. So we're here to open you a little bit, your mind, and open up your mind a little bit with some other options you can
share a little bit about what we know, what we've played, and our thoughts about those different types of games. So we mentioned high fantasy.
The other end of the spectrum, I guess, would be something modern age. Remember when we played that for this?
Well, even like Wizards, if I'm not mistaken, Wizards of the Coast came out back in the day with the Die 20 Modern, and I think they came out a little while ago with Ultra Modern for 4E, and you can find a whole bunch of homebrews, and that would take you into like more real life human characters in either like a high tech or like a spooky fantasy, kind of like there's other dimensions and portals and stuff that's happening that we can't really explain.
I would say it would be more rather, think of movies. Movies is a good analogy. I mean, a lot of the time you're going to do that. You're going to take stuff from movies and put in your role-playing games. Die Totally Modern, as an example, it was the action movie genre. We had something that was, Eugene found it hilarious, and we still find it hilarious. It's called Combative Driving Maneuvers.
Combative Driving Maneuvers. That's awesome. That's a great feat for your character.
Yeah, you could drive a car like in an action chase. So that's sort of stuff like.
Mechanics. There's actually a bunch of movies that have been coming out recently. There was one with Will Smith where he was paired up with an orc cop. It was called Bright. I thought that was like a kind of something you could take influence from if you wanted to play this modern mix of fantasy and contemporary. There's the cartoon. I love that. Onward.
Oh, I never saw it. Is it good?
Onward. I like it a lot. It's one of my favorite Pixar movies because it takes like all the old races and species from high fantasy, but they put them in a mundane situation. The story is about a couple of brothers that I'm not going to spoil anything. They need to get together with their dad, and the older brother's really into gaming and role-playing games, and he takes them to this whole convoluted quest to kind of like go back together with the dad that had passed away. But it's elves and it's unicorns and it's orcs and hydras and all these fantasy creatures in the modern era. So that'd be a different option. One of my favorite thematics that I never get around to playing is horror.
Horror is very interesting.
Yeah, got my buddy Cthulhu here with me today.
Yeah, one of the most famous systems where it's called Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, that's very cool. Tulu? How do you pronounce it, actually?
I say Cthulhu.
Say Cthulhu. That's a very interesting conflict. And that sort of mundane stuff, it's gonna happen to your table all the time.
Yeah, let us know in the comments, how do you say Cthulhu?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Very fundamental.
I'm not going to be able to sleep at night if I don't know how to properly say Cthulhu.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Lovecraft himself said it's an approximation of the actual name, what the cultists said in the... Yeah.
Anyway, Call of Cthulhu is a cosmic horror. Your characters are usually human, either investigators or cops, or you can even have artists or dilettantes and politicians, and they get lost into this, it's seemingly unwinnable world of madness and otherworld gods, and
it's very interesting because you basically cannot win. That's basically baked into the mechanics. You're not going to win. You're not going to win.
Just try not to lose that bad.
Yeah, and have fun in the process. So that's interesting. You can even play in D&D. There's we did play. There's a whole setting. That's something that happens a lot with the system. The system have their own settings called Ravenloft, which is a horror.
It's more like a Victorian era.
Yeah, it has the same mechanics of combat, similar mechanics to that, but it has the flavor of horror because you fight against vampires. You're usually in a losing situation.
With the other powers of the mist that like take you to these islands. I guess they're called the demi-planes of dread. I don't know if that's the same name nowadays.
Yeah, middle-aged.
But you have all these little islands, and the whole idea there, if I'm not mistaken, was you have these characters that become so corrupted with evil power that they're given their own little playground. And then you as a player kind of lost at the mercy of their powers. No, D&D has a whole bunch of settings. I remember back in the day we had Dark Sun, which was like the desert, Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, Francella, that classic sandals and barbarians, only with a loincloth fighting against incredible power.
Ravenloft we mentioned. There's Dragonlance, which is a more chivalrous, medieval kind of like honor, and they had a bunch of rules, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it Birthright?
Birthright is the one that was about...
They had like a whole bunch of system for using armies and large-scale battles and...
all that sort of stuff. Everything is possible in those systems. And, well, you could get lost into it. Just remember, at the beginning, keep it simple, but be aware that this is a possibility. You can also add sci-fi flavor to your actual role-playing game. We were just talking about that. We remember...
Yeah, we looked it up for you. It's called Dragon Star. And I remember it was just this weirdest combination of like these dragonoids, and they had lights. Like, I guess you can't use lightsabers, but they had swords that had little lights that you would cut through things. And they had lasers and a bunch of like high-tech fantasy, and you were out in space. And I think they even had rules for spaceship combats, and there's a whole bunch of options. You have your more classic Star Wars settings. I think there's even like a Trekkie campaign or modules and stuff.
Yeah, we were just talking one of the producers that they sent to Magic the Gathering. The settings of a lot of the settings from the game exist as role-playing game settings with their own rules, and even if they don't exist, you can actually make them.
Warhammer has, I think, their own
whole system. Yeah.
And there's a lot of independence. Like, I don't know if we can talk about them, but Pathfinder is another big company up there with the whole high fantasy.
But it also, the way it's made, it mixes a lot of stuff because it has a whole sci-fi feel to it, very weird stuff going in, and the whole world has everything.
Critical Role's coming out, I think, with their own gaming system as well. I mean, anybody who watches, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that like Critical Role, Vox Machina, or Vox Machina. I don't know
if you don't, check them out to learn more, but they're a bit more advanced, obviously.
And now, there's another thing that sometimes people will just take for granted. I mean, nowadays, we're playing 5th edition, which is the current era of D&D. But you can go back and play 4th edition, you can play 3.5, you can play AD&D. I mean, you don't have to limit yourself just to what's out now.
Yeah, one of our producers is actually a very big fan of this. There's a thing called the Old School Revival, and they take the older rules, they update them, they freshen up, they put a nice new coat of paint, they take out the very convoluted, confusing stuff, which was one of the main problems with some of the older systems, and they
You don't like Thaco?
No. Just so you know, Thaco was this thing that rather than rolling high for getting a success, you had to roll low.
Yeah.
So defenses sometimes were placed in the negative.
If you had a big field plate, I think you were at AC2 or AC0 with a shield.
And dragons had negative defense, which made no sense.
3rd edition got that right. I think 3rd edition changed it up, and they started going, instead of negatives, they went up to positives. So you'd have the higher the AC, the higher your armor class, the better it was.
Yeah, I mean, it has a certain baroque logic to it, but yeah. And remember, it's your game. If you don't like a rule, change it. For God's sake, change it. If it doesn't make sense to you, or you want to make something convoluted or simpler, do it. Because at the end of the game, if that's the case, don't take it.
That's actually something I'd like to get into later. You guys can look up what is raw and what is the rule of cool.
The rule of cool, yeah.
And that's basically it. I mean, you can use raw or the rules as written, which is the core books and what they tell you have to do. But I think even Gygax said they don't have to use these rules. I mean, you can use whatever you want. You can do it the way you want it. It's your game. Have fun. Go crazy.
Yeah, that's very important. Because at the end of the day, it is a fantasy, and it's customizing your fantasy to it. Yeah, some other settings, because we're going to focus a little bit on that.
Well, I was going to ask you what your favorite setting and edition was.
Oh well, I'm actually very into Pathfinder because of that variety of stuff. Because you can basically do anything there. I mean, setting wise. And I usually joke that I know more about the geography of the fictional setting than the actual real world geography. But in general, I tend to dislike not as much actual high fantasy and prefer more when we're getting into the Victorian era sort of stuff, which actually getting firearms, some sort of stuff like that. So I really like Ravenloft as well. Ravenloft was a very, very cool setting for that.
I remember you used to play Vampire the Masquerade. It was a Werewolf the Apocalypse.
No, I played a couple of games of that, but what I played the most was Hunter, which is when you go against those evil creatures. It's another whole different system, and the system is a very streamlined. It's very interesting. It's lighter on rules, and it goes a little bit more into the coolness factor, but it still has its rules. Has a lot of lore, that's how we call the setting itself. It's the lore. It has a lot of lore, which is pretty interesting. The whole thing is called the World of Darkness, and they have newer editions. The ones that we played were the older ones, so it's very different now. I'm not aware how it is now because we tended to focus on D&D, but yeah, it's very, very interesting. So what we're saying is, remember, as your game,
there's a lot of options.
You don't have to do the typical, and even in your own party, you don't have to do the classical. The elven archer with the wizard and you can mix it up a little bit instead of being.
There's been a lot of options now, like just for weird races and classes and stuff that add a lot of variety and spice.
Or take inspiration from cultures and not actually change that much mechanically. Like, for instance, I remember we once did something, it was a very cool campaign. It was a low magic campaign, which is something you can do, very little magic, placed in the Mongolian steppes. And one of the players chose to be a Japanese monk, the equivalent of Japanese. He knows who we're talking about, of course.
That didn't end very well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another one was inspired on Korean culture. I remember one of them was from Africa, or the equivalent of Africa in the setting. So, I mean, that also is possible. You can add a lot of cultural flavor from real world into, mix it up a little bit. Try to be racially sensitive, I guess, or don't. It's your game, but
as long as everybody's having fun.
Yeah, that's true. Remember, it's a whole group thing, so the whole group has to agree to it. We're not going to police you on that, or are we?
No. Anyway, let us know what your favorite setting, what your favorite game system is. If there's something we missed that you thought is worth mentioning, let us know as well.
And not just game setting, your best fictional setting, rather than just role-playing setting. Because I mean, maybe you like some sort of fantasy, some sort of sci-fi. Recommend this a book. I love to hear recommendations to expand my mind.
A lot of places to get your juices flowing from. Juices. Anyway.
Juices. Yeah, I'm thirsty.
All right, so this has been the third episode of a 4 series of episodes that we want to do for just basic gaming inspiration ideas. Next episode, we'll be talking a little bit about more like what we actually need physically. Dice, papers, books, stuff like that, with props, all that kind of fun stuff. So we hope to see you there. Take care.
Take care. We've been the Middle-Aged Barbarians, by the way. That would be thought, Truck?
Maybe.
Roll the dice! Bring it!